study 1 Samuel chapter 25, the last few verses 39 to 44. There is no lamentation from anyone with respect to Nabal's death, no funeral, no weeping from Abigail or the servants that we know about. In fact, when David learns about it, he thanks and blesses the Lord who avenged him and who kept him, held him back through Abigail's quick actions on committing evil had he taken Nabal's life himself. The NET says, "The Lord who avenged the insult I suffered." And with that, those amorous feelings about Abigail return, and we learn how David sent her a proposal via his servants to become his wife. You will remember that when she had met David, Abigail asked him to remember her, implying when he took over the throne of Israel, "Please remember me." Well, he jumped the gun a little, and he certainly remembered her now. When the servants went to her and told her what he had said, she arose, bowed her face to the ground, and stated that she was a maid ready to wash the feet of David's servants. I think the implication was that if she was willing to do that, she would certainly be more than willing to be David's wife. So she got up quickly, got on her donkey, and with 5 maidens who attended her, after all, she was well off to begin with, followed the messengers back to David and became his wife. Verse 43 tells us that during this time, David had also taken Ahinoam of Jezreel to be a wife, together with Abigail. It appears that earlier, since David was now his enemy, Saul had taken back his daughter Michal, who was David's wife, and had given her to Palti, the son of Laish, from Galim. We'll stop there and try to make some sense of all of this as we dig for scriptural gems. Many times, you and I are insulted by others and want to deal with that. The Bible suggests that we leave those insults to God to deal with. Lately in the news, we heard about the Vice President of the United States who is very much offended that the President's staff don't stand up when she enters the room. She struck out at them publicly and lost even more support. Let's leave insult paybacks to God. Second, this whole marriage thing gets a little crazy here, doesn't it? David was, some believe, for all intents and purposes, a single man, as his former father-in-law Saul had taken his wife from him just to spite David. When he married Abigail, David Gusick says she became not his second wife, but his second first wife. And here's a spoiler alert. Early in our study, Lord willing, of 2 Samuel, we'll see David get Michal back. Crazy, yes, I know. However, there's also the matter of another wife mentioned here, Ahinoam of Jezreel. Our text says in verse 43 that David had also taken Ahinoam, implying that she had become his wife before Abigail. And certainly later on in chapter 27, verse 3, we will see a support of that as she is mentioned first, before Abigail. Robert Jameson provides us with some historical perspective on David's marrying Abigail. He writes, "This unceremonious proceeding was quite in the style of Eastern monarchs, who no sooner take a fancy for a lady than they dispatch a messenger to intimate their royal wishes that she should henceforth reside in the palace, and her duty is implicitly to obey." David's conduct shows that the manners of the Eastern nations were already imitated by the great men in Israel, and that the morality of the times which God permitted gave its sanction to the practice of polygamy. His marriage with Abigail brought him a rich estate as well. David Gusick says this, "It wasn't directly sin because God hadn't commanded against it, but it did go against God's ideal, his plan for oneness in a marriage relationship. David was a man of great passions, and as a part of that, he had many wives. But because David never really followed God's plan and purpose for marriage, his family life was never blessed and peaceful." Family trouble brought David some of the greatest trials of his life. Today, you and I have no excuse. The New Testament implores us to have one spouse. And that's not an automatic license to divorce one and take up with another one. For if we do that for reasons other than what God would condone, we still stand to suffer in our family relationships as David did. The issue then becomes, what are those reasons that God condones? Well, that's another topic and another study. But as I have mentioned before, my personal take on this question is this. God never intended us to live with someone who is a repeated and unforgiving adulterer, or someone who is a repeated physical, social, and mental abuser and wishes not to be forgiven. I'll leave it at that, but I welcome your thoughts. No matter how we cut the cake, David was certainly carried away by the corrupt practices he observed in other nations, and perhaps also taking root in Israel at the time. He may have felt justified in doing what he did, given that his first wife, the wife of his youth, was stolen away from him by Saul. We also notice here that Abigail, although she had struck great esteem from being asked to be David's wife, she still treated his servants with respect. That's the kind of first lady that our countries need today. Respect for all people and an awareness of what God is doing. We each need to exhibit such behavior and awareness ourselves. Matthew Henry makes a point of comparing Abigail's marriage to David with the joining of an individual to Christ as part of being his bride, the church. He points out that David didn't even have a house in which to place Abigail as his wife. She did not demand an account of how he would be able to sustain her. No dowry was asked for her. No, she simply went to him as his wife by faith. She knew he was a good man, and she trusted him with her future. She also knew about what God had promised him. Henry writes, quote, "Thus, those who join themselves to Christ must be willing now to suffer with him, believing that hereafter they shall reign with him." End of quote. I believe, friends, that this is where the Christian living these days is. We go to Christ by faith, and we will have to suffer with Christ in the days ahead. But one glorious morning, one glorious day, we shall reign with him. I hope you are there. Next time, we'll find out about Saul's return to his hunt for David. Let's see who survives this time. Join us for that. Thank you for joining us today, and may you be encouraged to dig into the Word even more.